a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist joins us to talk about President Trump's long-standing financial ties with Russia and how that could tell us quite a bit about what's going on as we speak. Then we're going to check in on the midterm elections and where the numbers stand just 99 days before Election Day. We'll look at whether or not Democrats are widening their lead and how the battleground states in the Midwest are shaping up. Also, as President Trump threatens to shut down the government over his border wall and immigration, we'll show you how Republicans are responding. Let's just say they're not doing cartwheels. Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with a Russia probe. President Trump going on a Twitter tirade this weekend, attacking Bob Mueller personally, and of course, calling the whole thing just a witch hunt. It was Trump's most direct attacks against Mueller yet. Plus, Trump's legal team going on offense and attacking his former lawyer, Michael Cohen. President Trump's legal team ramping up its attacks on his former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen. The president's current attorney telling CBS
he turns out to be almost an instinctual liar.
This comes after multiple sources told ABC News that Cohen claims then-candidate Trump knew about the 2016 Trump Tower meeting involving his son, Don Jr., and several Russians ahead of time, which the president denies. Cohen also recently released a 2016 secret recording of him and then-candidate Trump.
When it comes time for the financing, which will be...
Listen, what financing?
We'll have to pay you. So
I'll pay for cash.
No. No.
That audio appears to show them discussing the purchase of the rights to the story of Playboy playmate Karen McDougal, who claims she had an affair with the president, an affair the White House denies.
You have complained to them that he's violating the attorney-client privilege, publicly and privately.
Cohen's attorney called that claim baseless, saying the president's team waived attorney-client privilege last week, which he says is what allowed the tape to become public. As his team goes after Cohen, the president taking aim at special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, suggesting over the weekend that Mueller has conflicts of interest.
The bigger picture problem for the president is that Robert Mueller can be unassailable to some degree.
As for an interview between the president and special counsel, Giuliani told CNN,
I think the odds are against it, but I wouldn't be shocked because he wants to do it so badly.
Our first guest tonight, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He's been following Trump's financial dealings for years. He says Trump's been entangled with the Russians for decades. David K. Johnston is also author of It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America. David, good talking to you as always. I appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here, Rich.
Well, first of all, when somebody says you've been covering Trump for 30 years, do you say, what have I been doing with my life? Or do you think about the insight that maybe others that, for us in New York, obviously he didn't burst upon the scene in 2016, but for most of America, he kind of did.
Yes, it was the television show that made him a national figure. I met Donald in June of 1988 when I left the Los Angeles Times, where I'd been an investigative reporter for a dozen years, to go to Atlantic City, because I thought casino gambling was going to spread all across America, and I wanted to see if government had actually cleaned up this historically corrupt business. And by the way, it really didn't. But Donald was very clear from the moment I met him. This was someone who was a significant cultural force in America. So I've stuck with him and followed him, as I have a handful of other people throughout the years.
The one thing about Trump, and again, for any of us who've covered him before the presidential aspirations, he's as transactional a guy as you know. So usually the motivations are really clear. For the life of me, and I haven't come to this, Johnny on the spot lately, I was saying this during the campaign, even 15, the apologias he would always do for Putin did not run true at all, because it's the only example where he looked out for someone other than himself, and it gave no political logic. I mean, there's not a huge Russian constituency in the voting electorate. Can you give any reasons why the compromise, where you think it might come from? Is it the oligarchs? Is it the gangsters? Is it the KGB? Why so protective of somebody that's obviously against America's self-interests?
Well, there's a lot of elements to this. Donald's first significant dealing with Russians came when Trump Tower opened, technically in the last month of 1983, but really in early 1984. And a Russian gangster paid cash for, I think it was 5, maybe 6 apartments in Trump Tower. And this was Donald's beginning to realize that the Russian gangsters who had been thrown out by the Soviet Union and who settled heavily in Brooklyn, in Brighton Beach, could be a source of money and influence and the things that Donald cares about. I mean, let's remember that Donald Trump is the third generation head of a white collar crime family. His father, Friedrich, was a draft dodger from Germany who came here in 1885 and made a fortune running whorehouses on the West Coast. And his father, Fred Trump, ripped off taxpayers, was the subject of a huge investigation ordered by President Eisenhower, and had as his business partner Willie Tomasello, who was identified in law enforcement reports as a front for the Gambino and Genovese families, the two biggest mafia families in New York. Now, in addition to this, it's important to remember that Donald admires people who simply seize power, who are essentially tyrants. He has no respect for the rule of law. He doesn't even understand what's in our Constitution. And everybody would have known that had any journalist asked him about his understanding of the Constitution during the campaign. In addition, we know that Donald has gotten a lot of money from the Russians. There are two things in particular that we absolutely know about. One is that one of his sons, after coming back from a trip to Moscow, said, "We're getting lots of money from Russia. They account for a disproportionate share of our assets." And secondly, when Donald was in trouble in 2008 and was unable to pay $40 million to Deutsche Bank, a bank well known and heavily fined for laundering money for the Russian oligarchs, suddenly Donald was rescued when one of those oligarchs, Dmitry Rybolovlev, paid him $100 million for a mansion a few miles from Mar-a-Lago, a mansion that's since been bulldozed. And at the time, the cover story for this ridiculous overpricing was that Rybolovlev was hiding money from his wife, who he was divorcing. You know, Rich, if you want to hide money from your wife, you don't go out and pay 2 or 3 times the value of something. You find things that you can buy at fire sale prices. This was simply a way to funnel money to Donald, as the Russians have done for a long time. And that's part of their larger campaign by the Russians to find people in the West, in Europe, America, Canada in particular, who they can compromise, who they can turn wittingly or unwittingly into their friends. And it's like venture capital. You know, venture capitalists out there on Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto, they'll fund 100 projects. 95 of them will lose every dollar they put in. 4 of them will make back enough money to make them even, and then they get a grand slam home run. Well, Donald Trump is a grand slam home run every day of the week.
This week, or this weekend more specifically, our president went on a Twitter tirade against, obviously, Bob Mueller, in a personal fashion, by the way. And then also we have Rudy Giuliani, after praising Michael Cohen, now he's an institutional liar. What do you think Team Trump, or more specifically the president directly, is more worried about? 20 years of personal fixing with Cohen and what he may have, or that in the course of the investigation, what Mueller may have already uncovered here in some of those tax returns, et cetera, and he might be able to connect in the dots with some of the financial issues you just articulated?
Well, I think all of these are of a piece. I predicted before Donald took office that he would be more and more erratic as time went by. And now that the Mueller investigation, the separate investigation of his former fixer and lawyer, Michael Cohen, by the prosecutors in the Southern District of New York, and some other events are all coming together, Donald is behaving even more erratically. He is behaving like a panicked person, and panicked people make mistakes. He knows perfectly well that Robert Mueller, who was a valorous, decorated Marine officer in Vietnam, is a very serious person. This is not like the 4 times that Donald beat grand juries, federal grand juries, through connections and delays and slick operations. It's not like when he avoided being prosecuted as a sales tax cheat, where he could go in, confess, and name other people and get off the hook, which, by the way, back in the day, Mayor Ed Koch, said Trump should have served 15 days in jail for his crimes. This is a very different situation with serious people with subpoena power, and who've gotten lots of results, by the way. If you look at the independent counsels prior to this special prosecutor, at this stage of the game, none of them were anywhere near the level of indictments and actions that have been taken by Robert Mueller and his team.
I want to get into another part, and obviously journalism's been your career here, and certainly some of the language that's been directed to it, specifically from the Oval Office, I haven't seen before. The president, he had a meeting with a publisher of the Times last week. It was supposed to be private and off the record, but Trump tweeted this out yesterday, quote, "Had a very good and interesting meeting at the White House with A.G. Sulzberger. Spent most of the time talking about the vast amounts of fake news being put out by the media and how that fake news has morphed into phrase enemy of the people. Sad." By the way, Trump came up with the terms fake news and enemy of the people. Now, after reading the tweet, the Times, the publisher came out and said that Trump totally misrepresented the whole meeting. Sulzberger also said he only agreed to meet with Trump to tell the president that his rhetoric was dangerous and journalists will get attacked because of it, and they now need security. Trump apparently was surprised they didn't already have security. Sulzberger also said he told Trump that his rhetoric was divisive and contributing to a rise in the threats against journalists. Now, after Trump heard about what the publisher had to say, he fired back, of course, with what else but a tweet saying, "I will not allow our great country to be sold out by anti-Trump haters in the dying newspaper industry. The failing New York Times and the Amazon Washington Post do nothing but write bad stories, even on very positive achievements, and they will never change." All this is a backdrop, David, too, and I want to be right here, but I just have a real bad feeling that he is ginning this up, and wherever the Mueller probe goes, he certainly will not go quietly in the good night. And the idea of making the media the enemy to do their job, somebody's going to get really hurt.
Well, the Trump presidency will not end well. No matter how it ends, it will not end well. And we will be paying a price for this terrible mistake we've made going on for years. Donald is a creation of fake news. In my biography of him, The Making of Donald Trump, that came out during the campaign, I point out that, Donald got national news coverage that he was supposedly having affairs with Kim Basinger, formerly Mrs. Alec Baldwin, Madonna, and Carla Bruni, later the First Lady of France. Complete nonsense. Two of them he hadn't met, and the third one had publicly called him a lunatic. And why, self-proclaimed billionaire has mistress or girlfriend is news continues to me to be really, I don't know why these things were written up or put on national TV by NBC at all. But Donald's whole career is based on false claims. There is not now, and there never has been, a scintilla of verifiable evidence, for example, that Donald is a billionaire. And you remember during the campaign, he said he was worth more than $10 billion. Well, after he became president, his lawyers asked if he could file his financial disclosure statement without signing it under penalty of perjury. Of course, he was told, no, you have to sign it. The net worth statement he filed is $1.4 billion, so almost 90% of his claimed wealth vanished. And even that statement I've shown has grossly inflated figures in it. But for someone who lives and thrives with fake news that he's planted about himself, claiming, he's the world's greatest lover and this terribly rich man and on and on and on, all of that goes right to why Donald attacks the news media. And all I can say to people listening out there is pay attention to what you read today and see if it comes to pass. Because again and again and again, the things Donald calls fake news, you just wait a few days, in a few cases, a few months, and lo and behold, the reporters pretty much had it on the money.
David, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, when we come back from the break, as always, there's always news in D.C. The president threatened to shut down the government again if they don't pay for his wall, just what Republicans want, with less than 100 days to the midterms. And on top of that, word is General Kelly, his chief of staff, may be heading out the door soon, whether it be by his choice or not. We'll have all that and much more with Rick Klein, political director at ABC News.